Welcome to the NRT Now podcast, giving you the latest in Christian music news, topics, and artist interviews directly from the largest Christian music site online, newreleasetoday.com. Now, here's your host, Jake.
Hey y'all, welcome to episode 26. If this is your first time with us, welcome. If you've been with us for a while, welcome back. If you haven't already, make sure that you're following us, subscribe, whatever they call it on your favorite platform, just so you know when new episodes come out. And we still have a lot of really cool stuff in store for you here. This is going to be kind of an abnormally long episode for what we've been trying to do lately, so I'm going to get right to it. But before we do that, just a couple of quick things. First, all of us here at NRT are hoping that you're getting through quarantine or social distancing, whatever you're calling it. We just hope that you're getting through it with some hope and hopefully some sanity. I know that I'm kind of going up and down personally with being okay with it all. I'm starting to go a little stir crazy here, but we really hope that you're getting through this with some hope. Just know that we're praying for the situation. We're praying for everything. And the second thing is, with this episode, we are actually doing a collaboration podcast, which is exciting. We did this a while back with KJ, and I loved what it did. So this week, we're doing a collaboration podcast with Seth and Nirva. They have the Freemind podcast. We'll talk about that a little bit later in our conversation with them. But you'll be hearing the same conversation here that you will on their Freemind podcast. I'm really excited to see where this goes. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Seth and Nirva. So we are in isolation mode. Should we call this the isolation episode, Seth and Nirva?
You got it.
That's good, yeah, man.
Someone called it timeout mode, yeah. Isolation,
Shelter, lockdown, whatever.
Divine Sabbath.
Yeah.
All those come to mind.
I think we as a society are super busy, and it's weird to slow down. It's weird to rest.
You're so right. And, on this level where the world is forced to rest, that's just huge to me. But I think we'd be crazy not to pause and really take it in and not just focus on all of the negatives, but the positives that could come from this. So it feels like, man, intervention for sure.
Right before this, I was trying to set up my home office. All our company's doing a work from home situation, and I'm having a hard time doing that. I'm invading on my homeschooling family's routine. And I get a side eye for that more than once, and I'm the disruptor in the routine for us.
I see.
Getting to hang out with the family has just been awesome at the same time. So, I mean, I definitely think it's a good reset.
Sure,
Yeah.
That's true. And, my heart breaks for those who are really affected financially, but the positives is family, which has been under attack. It's like now, it's like, let's remind ourselves, okay, family first, family comes first, and let's not just, have anxiety about the thought, but let's just try to embrace it and really make it a good time.
I love all the memes that have been coming out, like day 3 without sports. I found a gal sitting on my couch. She looks nice. Apparently she's my wife. She seems nice.
Exactly.
That's good stuff. That's so good.
Exactly.
There's some good ones out there for
Oh,
sure.
yeah. I feel like people have really come with their A game for this season of memes, for sure.
Well, we have all the time on our hands to make them, so I don't think
Right.
they're rushed as much anymore.
There you go.
Oh, yeah. Creativity is flowing.
I know that the artists, and tours and shows and all that are one of the industries that are hit hardest. What are you guys seeing from your side? Obviously, all your shows have been postponed. What are you seeing from the artist perspective from this whole lockdown, shutdown situation?
Oh, yeah, just the same. As you're saying, tours are being postponed and are canceled. Even great events put on by the church and services. I mean, all of the above. Seth showed me a meme that said something like, tours are canceled, and then even the local shows are being put off or whatever. And then finally, the financial small check of like $20 is being canceled as well. But yeah, I just see it all industries, definitely the music being put on pause until further, notice. So we see it for sure.
Yeah, I think even coming out here where we just recently took a position on staff at a church in Dublin, California, which is in the San Francisco Bay Area. So we got here right on time for the lockdown.
Oh man.
And,
Yeah.
but we came here. So one of the reasons we came kind of quickly too in the last couple of months was we were prepared for a big conference that we're having.
Yeah.
And we've traveled with the Beth Moore Living Proof things as well. And I know they just had to do an online one. And then we got here, we had to postpone the conference here, but then we had to postpone services as well.
Yeah.
And think through creative ways to do it online. So I think where a lot of artists are right now is like trying to figure out, okay, one, taking advantage of this time to reboot and refresh, using it for creative, spiritual refreshment, but also like connecting with people more online. So I'm seeing a lot of pop up like worship services. A lot of churches are doing that as well. We recorded just the other night because we found out that day at midnight that night they were going on the quarantine enforcement in this area in like 7 counties. So we went ahead and did 3 weeks worth of worship service sessions just to have it there in case we wouldn't be able to come back to church for 3 weeks. It's kind of a good thing. It's forcing us to be a little bit more creative and maybe connecting people that aren't connected or haven't been connected in the past online to churches and to artists are now being kind of opened up to that more and more. So this might end up being a good thing long term from that perspective.
I was listening to a bit of your most recent podcast, so plug for that. We'll come back to that later. The guest that you had, I can't remember his name right off the top, but he was saying that people were asking advice on how to stream, how to do live services, and there's equipment just out of stock, back ordered for days. Do you think that this is going to kind of bring a resurgence of creativity into the church and into worship and just kind of bolstering those games as well?
Yeah, no, I think so. I think, like you said, for a lot of them, and that was actually our brother-in-law who was talking about that. He's one of our co-hosts, but he does that at his church. And so I think it's a lot of churches, small and large now, are going to be forced to invest in that side, which is probably a good thing, because it'll give, even more churches that we haven't been able to see online. The bigger ones have, I think, had that going really well for a while, but I think even smaller ones, medium ones, that haven't maybe caught up on that end are going to get in that, and that's going to be a good thing. But then, like you said, for instance, for us, we had already done one Sunday where we were in the church. We streamed it live, and we only had the staff there. And the pastor was asking one of the people that were at home, like, how are you guys able to engage with worship? How did it translate? And they were like, we just kind of listened. It was good and it was engaging, but it was kind of difficult to sing along. So we began to think, how do we do this in a way that gets people in their living room singing? You kind of have to be creative in that way. And I think if your purpose is to get people engaged in actually worshiping God and connecting with Him, then I think if nothing else, it'll help us think through how do we do that through technology, which can be kind of weird and awkward in that sense. It's like, man, the next time, instead of doing it in our main sanctuary with big lights and smoke and all that kind of stuff, we got in a living room type setting. And we just kind of broke it down, had some scripture reading, some prayers, and tried to make it like we were just having a Bible study around the living room. And I think, I don't know, it's going to be an interesting season to see how different churches do that and engage people in that way.
As you're talking about that, I just started thinking, we're having to take the minute to look and how people worship. Just what you're saying, where people were like, hey, it's hard to sing in my living room and all that. It almost seems like a time to just think through and work through how we worship and how we actually connect and lead people to worshiping God.
Yeah, that's one of the great things about the pause for me is even the entire experience, not just the music. And so now that we have some free time, how can we be the church and bring this worship experience to those who may not be able to make it inside the building? It's a great time to pause and, like you said, hit the reset button. Okay, now that we can't gather, how are we going to be the church now that we're not able to go inside of the building? But how do we engage? How do we shine our light? How do we maximize what do we have in our hands that we can do and we can use to really reach people? And that's the great thing about technology is that you can reach people across the globe. And then as you think about that, what do you want to portray? How do you want to reach them? What do you want to say? And what's important? So I think on so many levels, it's a great time to really hear from God and allow the Spirit to download some creativity and some things that we might not have thought of because we're in mode week after week, just doing the routine things. So that's one of the great things I see is people that I haven't seen online in a while pausing and just sitting with their family, worshiping, reading the Bible, doing devotionals. And I love that the church right now is flooding the airwaves with ministry. And that's a beautiful thing that's come out of this as well.
I'm also seeing a lot of artists just doing a lot more online, impromptu, scheduled live stream shows. And I'm really interested to see where that goes. A lot of it so far has been, an acoustic guitar with the phone. I'm really excited to see where that goes and the creativity and what that means for Christian music down the line as well.
Ooh, that's a good point. I'm optimistic. I think great things can come of this because I think God is creative. And I think if we position ourselves to just really receive and hear, pray about it, and just say, okay, God, how would you have me reach the body and be a blessing in a new, fresh way? I think if we as a body do that, I think awesome things can come of that for sure.
Yeah, and I think when you have big production, you can kind of lean more into that in a church service, and it kind of removes that element a little bit and makes it more about the substance, and it kind of makes you rethink, like, man, how do we really encourage people? Some of the conversations we're having amongst the staff right now on Zoom, because we can't necessarily come together, it's like, how do we really encourage people and give them spiritual substance that can get them through these difficult times, instead of just like, man, how do we make this a banging service? And I think because it's refocusing us and then the creativity serves that good, in that sense, I think it reorients us in a good way of, like you said, asking questions like, well, what are we trying to do in the worship service? Are we just trying to kind of give people a good experience and make them feel good and inspire them? Or are we actually using this as a thing to align their hearts and strengthen them for kingdom purposes and prepare them to go out and actually be the church in this crazy time?
And as we come back and maybe listen to this in a couple, 3 months' time, a year, it'll be interesting to see what we're talking about now and what that actually equates to once we're on the other side, or at least farther down the path of this. And once we're able to start gathering and start coming back to the buildings and stuff, just to see what it looks like on the other side and what transpires in this next however long this is going to take.
For sure. I'm encouraged. I'm inspired too, because even the messages that I'm hearing are a little bit different, a little bit more. Life is hitting right now, and I really, really need God. And so I think those kinds of messages are what I'm hearing more so on social media. So that's encouraging.
It is. And there's always a tendency when things get back to normal to kind
Yeah,
of,
true.
get lethargic and relax. But I'm hoping this will be a jolt that has long-term consequences, and just that will maybe continue to come back and say, you know what, let's not allow ourselves to get into that kind of lethargic, non-engaged place we were in. Let's kind of stay focused and stir each other up, fan the flame, and continue to come back to this moment.
My mind's been going like 8,000 miles on
Mhm.
this whole topic over the last week. And I guess one of the things that just kind of popped into my brain as we're kind of talking here is one of the big questions a lot of non-believers have, and even I think as believers have, is how can God let something like this happen, like this pandemic? I mean, that's something that's tough to deal with to start with. Now we have this global pandemic. How do we wrestle with the fact that God can let this happen when he can make it all go away in a heartbeat as well?
Somebody said this the other day with Kobe Bryant's tragic helicopter accident and his death and his daughters. Many people, because we're so distracted and so entertained, and we have so much blocking us from asking the bigger questions these days, sometimes things like that can shock the system enough to make people ask those deeper questions that most humans have asked throughout history, but we don't tend to as much these days. There's a book by Neil Postman called Amusing Ourselves to Death, and I can't remember if it was written in the 80s or 70s, but how much more so now. But we do that. We block ourselves from ever engaging in those age-old questions. But thankfully, many people have, and there are some great answers out there. And once you start asking those questions and you pull at the thread, it actually ends up leading you back to God often. Many people have said the problem of evil, one of the things it does is it exposes good. If there's an evil, that means it's a departure from what ought to be. And if there's an ought, that requires a transcendent grounding, which is what God is needed in that philosophical system to ground objective goodness. Otherwise, you have matter and motion. There just is. There's no ought. When you get into those bigger questions, it gives us an opportunity, like you said, to kind of share, does life have a purpose? If it has a real purpose, then we realize there is something wrong. And then what is the answer to that? And that's where our theology comes in. And we talk about the things like the fall of mankind in Genesis and the effects of that, and how God uses suffering. I think it was C.S. Lewis that said, God whispers to us in our pleasure, but he shouts to us in our pain. It's the megaphone that God uses to get the attention sometimes of a world who is in rebellion against him and doesn't want to think about him, doesn't want to submit to him, doesn't want that authority. It's an opportunity for us to come in because we do have not easy answers as Christians, but we do have solid answers. And we do have things to not only answer the philosophical question, but we have the resources to deal with the actual pain that we experience because of suffering. We see in the cross of Christ that central theme that through suffering, God can bring about great redemption. And like you said, he is with us in the pain, and that there's a purpose he's working out through it.
I think one of the hardest things that people have to get their head around is that, this isn't necessarily God caused. It's not like God said, here, release COVID-19 or, coronavirus or the Rona, whatever you want to call it. But it's something that happens. I think that's what a lot of people have is like, did God do this? Yeah. Or does God do this in my life? Does God cause things to happen? I don't think that he does this, but I think he uses it nonetheless.
A few weeks ago, I remember praying to God, asking for just wisdom and understanding on how to do life better, how to go about our day to day with a little bit more wisdom, and started studying James. And I found it interesting that one of the first things the book of James talks about is trials. And the scripture that says, it's difficult to do, but to just count it all joy when you encounter trials of various kinds. And, I look at tests not always to just tempt me, but to just show me where I am. When I look back over my life through everything I've walked through, it did work, a strengthening, a perseverance, a patience. But I think of people who are influential in the world, who are not necessarily believers, who have decided that when you walk through difficult things, it's pretty good to just face it and do the best you can and try to be a positive light through it. And I think that even points to how precious and how much purpose life has, whether you're a believer or not, and that trials and suffering and tribulation, they're here. What do? We can sit and blame, or we can just decide, okay, I can just wallow in this and just be depressed, or choose to just be angry, or I can choose to just make the best of it, be a light. But we know as believers that God has things to say about suffering. He said, you will face trials in this life, but to take heart. I will overcome the world. I've given you my spirit. I'm giving you wisdom, and you can ask of me and learn of me. And so being a believer doesn't mean that you won't go through things. It just means that you have a God that you can run to, that you can pray to and ask for strength when you need it. Really good questions you're touching on here. And I think that's one good thing that is happening in this pause, that people are asking the deeper questions. And it's an opportunity for sure for the church to have these answers. Not that we have all the answers all the time, but we know where we can run to.
We're reminded that, like Paul taught, he wrote in Romans that through one man, death entered the world. And that Christ, he basically overcame death, that final enemy it talks about in Revelation. And one day, death will finally be put to death. And, that is the Christian hope, that even if we die here, you don't have to have that second death. And, he has started that process of making all things new. Like you said, we can't jump to the conclusion that this pandemic, it's him causing it, because, we talked about this on the podcast the other day, that we do have exceptions to the rule. That was Job's advisors. His friends came and said, well, you're going through this. God is just. And therefore, if you're going through this, it's because you have sin in your life. And that we see that's a bad conclusion. And then even Jesus in the New Testament, when the disciples asked him, why was this man born blind? And was it because he sinned or his parents? And he said, well, neither one, but he was born blind basically for me to reveal my glory through healing him. Now, on the other hand, we do know that God does do that many times as well. Like, it's somewhat normative in the Old Testament as well as even the New Testament, Ananias, Sapphira, as well as the book of Revelation. We see God can and does use judgment, sometimes on a large scale. And for that, it can remind us to at least ask the question, God, is this something we need to repent? And I think many people are calling the church to stand in the gap. I know just yesterday, Lou Engle called for a 3-day fast. We're joining him today on that and asking other people to join. But just to pray that this nation would repent of things we've done, that the church would rise up and be a voice for the voiceless. And, We don't necessarily have insight into what's going on behind the scenes with this particular virus. Was it sent by God? Was it a satanic thing? Is it just natural effects of a fallen world? We don't have that answer. But either way, it can be a cause for us to say, God, have mercy, Lord, in this thing right now, and help it to somehow bring glory to your name, help the church to rise up and stand in the gap. And I think, we do need to understand God is holy. He is just, but he also brings mercy, and he leans into mercy. And we have that in the cross of Christ, and that's a message we bring.
When we started this, we were talking a little bit beforehand about where this was going, and I totally did not expect it to go this way. But wow. At the same time, what's crazy, we're talking about everything having to shift in the church, not only with the services, but all these questions are starting to come out and starting to get really deep really fast. And all this is just really being dumped on church leadership in a hurry.
For sure. There's a lot of opportunity to fall under criticism right now as a church leader. Either you're being not careful enough or you're being too careful, and there's all those in between. Definitely pray for the church leaders right now if you're listening to this. There's a lot of need for just divine wisdom and guidance, that we would choose the right paths, listen to the right voices. We were talking about this the other day, that it's hard to know which authorities to trust in this case. You have the media, which is basically at this point, rightfully so, lost the confidence of the populace. They have really betrayed our trust in many ways. At this point, you don't know, is this sensationalism? Is it politicization? Is it truth? And which parts are truth? So I think we're in a situation, even as church leaders, where we're trying to find voices we can trust on the medical end. We're trying to use wisdom, but also lean into faith and not fear. And so there is a lot of things to consider.
There's a whole bunch of financial consideration behind the media,
Yep.
political side of it. I mean, I've seen stuff all the way from, I've had this kind of an illness in January, December. We didn't know what it was called. Now we do. Has it been here for a while? Are we on more of the tail end of this, or are we on the front end of this, or is it going to kill a million people like some of the projections are? I mean, there's so many unknowns in the whole process.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we've been speculating too, because we were
Right.
we were actually in DC, Washington DC, for the March for Life. We were doing worship there for an organization called Radiance Foundation, and Nirva got she got a really bad flu. Like she had
First time in ages.
Yeah.
And it took me out.
Of course, she was kind enough, my spouse, to pass it on to me. You know what I'm saying?
That's just what you do.
Yeah, she's the gift. She's given that gift. And then for some reason, I had struggled with it for like a month and a half, and I just recently got over it. And so we've been thinking the same thing. It was like, man, did we catch the early strand of this thing? And you're right. It's like so much uncertainty at this point that we're trying to just kind of scramble and see what emerges maybe over the next 2 weeks.
In time, we'll know. I feel like looking back, things have been exposed. The truth comes to light sometimes. The same with this. I think a year from now, like you said, we'll look back and we'll see, okay, that's what happened with that. You know what I mean? And God uses time as a tool to reveal it.
Well, yeah.
So,
the rear view mirror will
right.
be telling.
If we just be very patient, I think, and not lose our heads. So tempting, though.
If we bring this back down to a personal level, not a global pandemic, I'm that kind of guy that I may look like I have it together on the outside. On the background, my brain is racing through every worst case situation that can happen in a situation. When you're thinking about, you haven't heard from a friend for 2 weeks, like my brain goes down that worst case scenario with a lot of those kind of things on a personal level. So for me to say like, hey, let's take this slow and let's wait for stuff to come out. I say that a lot on the outside, but very rarely in the process in my brain.
Please.
You and probably half the world, if we're honest. I mean, you catch me on a day where I let my brain get to going. Oh my gosh, it takes power from on high for me to stop it. My old pastor used to say the only thing that can intercept a bad thought is a new thought. And so you just kind of have to use your wheelhouse to recognize when you're in that place of anxiety and worry, and just reset your mind on a thought that whatever is good, whatever is pure and noble and of good report, there's something really healthy about meditating on those things. And it's not just mere self-therapy, but it's just wisdom and good practice. And I think God created us that way, that we become what we behold. So if I search social media and just go down that trail, oh my gosh, my soul truly follows that. And it doesn't even have to be social media. I was off social media for a few weeks and I loved it. And now I'm back on, and like here I am again, back in that same cycle. So I have to just use my wheelhouse to just submit it to the Lord, to tell my brain, okay, I recognize where I'm going with this, and let me try to just think on something true, something positive, and have my scriptures in hand that just really remind me of the goodness of the Lord and how He is sovereign. He's not asleep. This has not taken him by surprise. And that sounds cliche, but it's really true. And I think he's doing a deep down work in a lot of us through this, because I have just never seen this before. I've never seen the church, the world, all these industries having to pause and just go into a time of you're not going to depend on what you've depended on, and you're forced to kind of rest from your routine of life. And this is something new for me. I want to get it. Whatever God is trying to do, I want to receive it. And I want to encourage all my friends and people that I come in contact with, like, hey, this looks crazy, but this could be something awesome in the end. But I get what you're saying. You're not alone in that. I just want to encourage you that the enemy has a way of making us feel so isolated anyway. And through this, when we have time to think on crazier things, but here's God with his word and his scriptures and his faithfulness saying, hey, I'm here. Look to me. I can be trusted. I'm faithful in this. And so we can trust the Lord. He has a good track record with us.
There's good sense in preparing within reason. I mean, I have family members, I won't say who they are, but extended family members who they will work up a scenario in their head that has a 0.0001% chance of happening and worry as though it had a 20% chance of happening.
Yeah.
You know, you don't want to do that. Like, you want to
Yeah.
be realistic on, like, okay, what are the probabilities here? And sometimes it's good to think through
Sure.
the options. But I do think what Nirva was saying is true. Is like, what are we putting our minds on day in and day out? It was Derek Prince once. He was a Pentecostal Bible teacher back in the day. And he said he and his wife only looked at the weekly news because he wanted to be aware of what was going on, but he didn't want to constantly be putting information in that was going to take his mind off of God and his kingdom and drawing him into worry. Let's put in more Bible right now, maybe a little less news, not completely get away from it, but within reason, being aware of what's going on, being wise. But for the most part, let's be careful with what we're feeding ourselves mentally.
If you want to be fearful of it, then you can find all the information that you want to be fearful. If you want to make it seem like it's no big deal, then you can find all the information on that too. I mean,
For sure.
Definitely true.
Heaven forbid that you don't have any toilet paper at the house and you're just at this point, you know.
Right.
Some people have a garage full. Some people are, well, let's not go there. That's probably not
so true. I'm sorry. That's hilarious. That also points to how the minds can be swayed in a certain way. And I looked up one day and I was like, toilet paper? How did that become the craze? And so I would have thought of such more fun things to stock my house with if I knew I'd be in here in 2 weeks, you know. The sway of culture and media, it really does a trick on the mind and the brain. It's just good to remind yourself, okay, am I being fed information that is from an authority that I can trust, that's guiding me in the wise place, or am I just feeding myself the latest thoughts that's going to sway me into just worry and anxiety, and I need to do this and all that. And like I said, there's just a balance. You want to be wise. You don't want to be caught out there, but then you don't want to just be caught up in the sway and the waves of culture. Who was that? The Bible preacher that said, you have your Bible in one hand and then your news in the other hand. And I think the Bible should help you interpret the news, the times we're living in. So for some reason, when I read the scriptures these days, it's so fascinating. Like, I'm just reading, anything, any of the books, like the Book of Kings, it's like, it really speaks right now. And if I allow it to really receive it like it's the word of God, and this is history, and God is just teaching me through this, it can really speak to the times we're living in if you let it. And it's so empowering and so eye-opening. Like, this stuff we're walking through right now, it's wild, but crazier things have happened in the Bible times. And it really speaks to how God was active with the Israelites and with culture then as well. So just an encouragement that the Bible is a source of knowledge and a source of wisdom to really help you walk through these times we're living in today.
Absolutely. Whenever we get to the end of this here, one of the lessons that I really hope that we learn, just like what we're talking about, the patience, just working through the process. And,
Yeah.
I think as humans, we have the tendency to panic, hence why there's no toilet paper within, the borders of this country, it seems like. But even Amazon was sold out. If Amazon doesn't have it, that's some serious.
What you just said made me think, okay, if Amazon is out, there's no hope. But then, they're just one avenue. They're just one little authority in this vast world we live in. And I went to the store before this all hit, and I was able to find everything I needed, pretty much a cart full of stuff. And so it's like, you have to kind of hold it out and just process it for what it is. But it's not a final authority on our lives, not even Amazon, all the juggernauts. We're in Silicon Valley where Google is and Facebook and all of these big corporations, Tesla, and kingdoms come and they fade. Look back over, the Roman Empire, people were just shocked that the Roman Empire fell. And so it's like you got to remember that in light of the kingdom of God, these are not the authorities that we go by. And I don't mean to super spiritualize it, but then at the same time, I'm like, this is the lens I'm going by. I'm going to really, really cling to God being sovereign, God being my authority, and finding people that I know seek Him and have wisdom and knowledge on what we're dealing with today, and taking my cues from those people, because God uses people in the earth today. We have an episode on our Freemind podcast on anxiety, and it was by J.P. Moreland. He is just a giant as far as doing work with the existence of the soul, the spirit, and he's debated a lot of atheists. He's done just a lot of work in the Christian world. He went through a heavy battle of anxiety and depression and spent some time studying and doing a lot of research on that and wrote a book about it. We got a chance to interview him, and I just want to put it out there. If anybody out there that's struggling with anxiety and even depression, he just dives deep into what that is, and he studies and research. It's a strong Christian on how to overcome, but it's on one of our Free Mind episodes if you ever want to check that out.
We'll touch on the podcast here in just a second, but
Sure.
where I was really wanting to head is I really hope that we take the lessons that we're learning from the global pandemic scale, and just really take those lessons to heart as we go through personal things. As tough stuff comes up in life, to just be able to work through the process and just take it the one step at a time, get groceries for this week and see what this next week or two holds. Just really work through that process and not get so anxious at the start that we create a problem for ourselves when down the road we see that, hey, the grocery stores will be restocked, or, it's just not that big of a deal down the road. Yeah, you still need to take steps to protect yourself and to work through it. And it still wasn't fun in the middle of it. But at the end, did I overreact or did I work through it, in a methodical manner?
So good. That's
good.
it. You said it. That's key.
So when we all actually get to go out, I think one of the fun things we'll see from a Christian music perspective is I think a lot of the concerts should be full as they start rolling through.
For sure.
Yeah, for sure.
I think it'll be a process too for people to trust it, that this virus is finally done and gone and it's safe. But I do look forward to that. That'll be really, really fun. When we finally walk through the doors of the church again, we'll be like excited to be there. And the joy will be full. So you're right. I do look forward to that for sure.
I think it won't be a chore anymore. Like, got to go to church today. It's Sunday. Or we're Saturday night people.
Definitely. It'd be more of a privilege.
For sure.
And a joy to look to, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Using that as kind of a segue, I did actually get the chance to meet you guys. I think it was 2018. So I actually have a funny Seth and Nirva story.
Uh-oh. Okay.
All right, I'm blindsiding you with this, and I'm thoroughly okay with this. No, it's actually a good one. So I helped out it was a festival called The Uprising in Casper, Wyoming. No, it was almost 3 years ago now. When we had the totality for the eclipse that year.
Yep, I remember that.
The event was the night before, and we had the totality the day after, and all the craziness that ensued. A 4-hour trip to Denver to the airport, I think, took me 9 hours. And that's just because I knew to go the back routes.
Oh my gosh.
That was painful.
I'm sure.
But you guys were performing, or it was your guys' set there. And the laptop decided it wanted to overheat because the stage was set in direct sunlight. the laptop decided it wanted to overheat and not work and all that. And working backstage, we made a little makeshift cooling rack, a little cooling area there. Took it a few minutes for the laptop to cool down, but it was able to finish out the set. I think it was you, Nirva, that did a little worship set with just the piano while all that got set. But yeah, I was the guy that was there that made that little makeshift air cooler.
Wow.
You were there.
That's funny that you made
We
it.
will never forget that day. And then I remember that same day, like later on that evening, a big old windstorm or something started blowing everything over at the festival. I was like, so we went from the most intense heat to the windiest evening. But
Hilarious.
totally remember that day.
We were just telling that story this week.
Told that story.
Yeah, out here at the church, and I had no idea that you were the one that did the fan. That's hilarious. That had never happened to me before. Sun was so intense. I said the mouse started moving on the screen by itself. It shut us down, like our tracks down for like 10 minutes.
Oh my God.
Hilarious. Wow.
That's funny.
I'm an IT guy by trade, so as soon as it started doing, I kind of had a general idea of what to do, and we scrambled. I think we made it out of a tarp and a desk fan is, I think, what we made it out of. Just enough to canopy and just channel the fan with the tarp. And then the fan was able to move at least enough air where it cooled it down where the rest of the set could finish.
Wow. Well, I'm glad God providentially brought you there at that time with your IT skills to do that.
We still appreciate it.
Awesome.
That's a fun story.
What you're talking about, Nirva, later on that evening, it was a windstorm and a rainstorm, which ironically enough happened the next year. The same kind of situation.
Oh, wow.
The wind came through, the rain came through. We had to delay the show a couple of times. I think Sidewalk Prophets was the headliner that day.
Yep.
And we had to actually postpone it twice for lightning. After the first one went, Anthem lights got out, tried to get set up and all that. And we had another lightning strike. So they went back to the trailer. And
wow.
It's like, well, I guess that's a practice run. See how long it takes us to get out and do this again. So go back to the bus and we'll do this again. It was cool. Both Anthem Lights and Sidewalk Prophets both worked together on that one and made it so where they had a good chunk of each one of their sets. You know, Sidewalk Prophets didn't say, well, your time's up, tough cookies. They both worked to trim to make sure everything all worked together. So that was something really cool to see from behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Oh, that's cool. That's
awesome.
Really awesome. I love to hear that.
Next year, like I said, the same thing happened. The wind came up. We had to shut down and rain came pouring through, and apparently that's the thing for that show.
Wow. Man, I mean, that sounds like intense weather for that time of year. Maybe think of another month or something to hold that festival. But yeah, I'll never forget that weekend. It was really, really cool. And then the next day to witness the eclipse, you know, we were on the highway heading back to the airport, and everyone pulled over to the side of the road to just watch it. It was just so much fun that weekend.
It was crazy. I was at my in-laws' house as it started getting through, just to feel the temperature shift. We're all outside on the back porch, and the way I describe it was, you know how like when you know something's going to happen and your body just goes cold and your hair stands up and just that sensation? That's what I described that totality as. I mean, it dropped probably 15 degrees in a matter of 10 minutes. It was something to witness.
It was fierce. I do remember that. And then I remember these like shadows of little fiery things on the ground from the shadow from the skies. It was so powerful to witness. We Insta-storied live. It was just so much fun. It was a memory made for sure that weekend.
The world didn't come to an end like some people thought it might.
There you go. That's another milestone we overcame.
Yeah.
So all of that worry. You're right. You're so right.
Let's kind of transition a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about Seth and Nirva. And Nirva, we know a little bit about your story with Toby Mac and being one of the vocalists. Where did this Seth and Nirva as an artist come from?
When Seth and I met, we were background singers for Christian artists and doing the road life thing. And when we got married, we decided to, I don't know, just kind of work on songs. We did ministry together. I'm giving you the short version. People began to hire us to do vocals for live shows and for studio work. And we decided that our voices worked kind of well together. Fast forward years later, we were doing young adult ministry at our home church in Tampa, Florida at the time. Integrity Music contacted us. They were interested in signing us because we had put out a small EP on the digitals maybe a year before, and they heard it. It got into the hands of someone that worked at Integrity. they liked it so much, they checked us out and signed us to a contract. And so that's the short version of it. We've always loved singing individually. We started singing together. We worked on songs and would travel and do ministry. And so, yeah, that's how the artistry kind of developed.
You're saying that Seth was, background singer as well. Talk a little bit about that transition.
I have described it in the past as like the difference between stepping onto a Carnival Cruise Line cruise ship and then stepping down to get into your own canoe and paddle yourself to shore. But yeah, when a label signs you, they put money behind you and they got producers and you work on this project. You have to kind of do some ministry and travel in order to promote it. But what was happening was I was always on the road with Toby when these opportunities would come up for Seth and I. And we decided that God was doing something in us and we had a message and we had these songs that we wanted to just kind of share. And so we decided, okay, maybe it's time for me to step down from Toby. I've done it for years and God was doing something new with us. That's how it started. We just prayed about it and decided, okay, let's just go ahead and pursue Seth and Nirva. Let's just do what God has placed on our hearts. And prayerfully talked to Toby about it, and he was super supportive. And so, yeah, that's how that transition happened. It wasn't as smooth as we had initially thought it would be. I mean, it was a lot of tough days because when you're starting over ground up, it's grassroots. It takes a lot of work, takes a lot of patience, lots of prayer, and you're not as funded as you were. You have to get creative and think of ways to fund your project. You have to save up and all that. And so it wasn't smooth, but it was good. And we look back over it and we are very grateful, very much enlightened and in awe of God and all that he's done. When you take a step of faith, people think that it's just day one. It's going to be, okay, I've prayed about this and it's going to be good times here on out. That definitely was not the case with us, but there were some mountaintop experiences. There were times when we thought, okay, is there sin in the camp? God has shut his eyes towards us. But he was just building strength, building patience, and building and sometimes I'm not giving up kind of spirit when you know you're called to something. That's the treasure when you have developed such a trust in God that you can say, I know that I can just continue on in faith. Even if he doesn't come, I will trust him. And so that's been the experience and we love it. We put out a project, One with Integrity Music. A new president came in, and that was a part of the shifting that I was telling you about. And we decided that instead of going along with what others were saying, we needed to do that. There was something God was doing special in our own hearts, and we wanted to just kind of pursue that and put our money and resources behind that. So yeah, here we are, Seth and Nirva, husband and wife duo. We do ministry, we travel, we speak, we do worship, we do conferences. We are tied to the local church. We believe in praying for the body of Christ, for our government, for education, all the mountains. And I think today, artistry is more than just singing songs. Times are so crazy right now, and people need a word. People need a message that will give them hope, that will encourage them and give them reason to hope, reason to stand in these crazy times we're living in. So, sorry, long answer to a simple question you asked.
Oh, that's perfect. I'd like to hear a little bit from Seth. Maybe I'm just dense, but I don't know much of Seth's backstory. Maybe I just don't follow Christian music enough or something.
No, it's all good. So I was more in the gospel realm, and that may be why I started off with Kirk Franklin for a few years, traveled with Donnie McClurkin for about 8 years, and these are kind of guys more on the black gospel side. Through Nirva, I started doing more CCM stuff, so I connected. We did some of the Passion events, with Chris Tomlin, and then travel with a buddy, Travis Cottrell, different Beth Moore events and stuff like that. So we've kind of had a range of background experiences, which has been cool. Just getting to see different sides of the body, of denominations, of artistry approaches. And so, yeah, we kind of bounced around a little bit all over the place.
I love when the diversity just kind of comes into a final product. I played under different worship leaders that goes all the way from Israel Houghton and some stuff that I would have never listened to on my own to Casting Crowns, kind of that full gamut. I love being able to mix all of that together.
Yeah, we do too, man. It kind of just happens naturally for us having those different backgrounds. And I think Israel, for instance, that you mentioned, was one of the guys that did that really well. He brought together different sounds and different groups of people, and he ended up actually co-producing our first album with Integrity. So we fit naturally into that mix kind of area.
One of the first major events, at least maybe I'm just projecting this, but was the Jesus Freak Cruise in 17. At least was the first time I heard of you guys as Seth and Nirva.
Yeah. I think we put out the album with Integrity in 2016, and it was a bit of a just a rocky road getting it launched for various reasons. But we got it out, and then had a song that kind of caught some on radio called "Brother," and it was featuring Gabriel from the Diversity Band as well. That kind of opened up some doors. We started doing some stuff overseas in the UK, and then stuff here as well, South Africa, festivals here in the US, as well as we did the Hits Deep tour, I think around the time that you mentioned. We still are doing some traveling, and now we've just shifted our home base from Florida to the West Coast. And we just finally released our second full length album called One Voice just this month. So I think, I guess it had been 4 years between the two, and we've done singles in between and continue to travel a little bit in the meantime.
And I was listening to this new project here just a little bit ago, and I'm a fan. I can definitely hear a lot of those influences, just all the different influences kind of bundled into one, and I was definitely jamming out to it earlier.
Oh yeah, man! Thanks for giving it a listen. And this one we even added another kind of diverse layer because the guy who produced it was from the UK, so we added kind of a across the pond elements to it as well. So, but yeah, it's been fun. Been a lot of fun.
We mentioned a little bit about the podcast. What's that all about?
We started it last year, right? January, and we try to put out an episode per week, and it's called Freemind, and they can find it at www.freemind.f or just on Apple Podcasts, any podcast outlets. If they just look up Freemind and maybe type in our names, it'll pull up. The tagline is freedom from captivity to the spirit of the age and freedom to take on the mind of Christ. And so what we're trying to do is help people to think biblically about what's going on in our culture. We felt compelled to do it originally because we just saw so many people, especially younger folks, that were being taken in by unbiblical ideas and even walking away from the faith in many cases. For so many times, it was really unnecessary. It wasn't like there were really good objections to the Christian faith. It was just the sway of culture that was pulling them in. Yeah. I had a background in apologetics, and we go through a lot of reading and thinking about these issues. So I just felt like, man, we should probably not sit this out, but we need to engage a little bit. And I thought a podcast would be a better way to do it than Twitter, where you get, I guess it's the 120 characters or whatever. And I was like, what's the best medium for us not to just simply get in there and have soundbite fighting, but to actually be able to give like a thoughtful analysis over a long discourse. And so we began to do that, and thankfully many people have connected with it, and it's been helpful. I think we try to interview leading Christian thinkers and scholars and connect the church to its thinkers. You know, there's a lot of them out there, but sometimes the local church isn't aware of these people that are on the front line. So we talk about everything from politics to LGBTQ activism to abortion to different Christian leaders that have walked away from the faith publicly, progressive Christianity. And so we really don't shy away from the hot button issues, but we try to be respectful and humble, but present a firm biblical case and help people to not be taken in by it, basically.
Which is cool, because I think a lot of people, churches, a lot of Christians, with a lot of the backlash that you get from standing strong on the Bible, just shy away from it and just, kind of whatever. Just, I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole.
Basically, these days, I think the area of kind of hiding out in neutrality is shrinking day by day. Was it the Billy Graham quote we always use that courage is contagious? When few brave men stand up, brave men and women stand up, it stiffens the spines of others. And so we draw courage from other people, and we try to give that courage to other Christians as well, to recognize that it is a battle of ideas. In 2 Corinthians 10, where Paul says we take thoughts that are raised up against the knowledge of God, we take those thoughts captive, and we tear down strongholds that are raised up. And that's part of what we do in this ministry. And like you said, it can be tempting at times to just be silent or kind of sit on the sidelines, but really God has called us to engage and to be willing to say the unpopular thing and even be unpopular, to be maligned in public. And we get some of that. Most of the response has been positive, but you do get some occasional pushback, and you have to be ready for that as well.
I think there's a good line of being solid, having a solid foundation in biblical truth and being able to take a stand, but also being kind and loving to people in the process as well.
No, you're right. Barry Corey, I can't remember the president, Biola, he likes to say have firm centers and soft edges. I think that's helpful. We often talk about courage and compassion and dealing with people as individuals, not treating ideas as though they're all equal, but really exposing ideas while caring for the people that hold those ideas.
Some Christians are polarized on either side of it. Some people are way to the side of almost being hateful. Some Christians are just to the point of just being permissive and just whatever.
Yeah, for sure. And that is the challenge. When you get into this line of thing, there can be a kind of current pulling you in the direction of hypercriticism and just being kind of angry all the time. So you do have to watch it. You have to understand the pitfalls. Like you said, you have to stand in that tension between the two often and keep your softness and love toward even your enemies. Sometimes it's easier than others, but we try to always come back to that combination of standing firm but not being repugnant in your expression.
I'm just thinking of like the Westboro Baptists and some of these that give Christians a bad name because that's I think they hold views that a very minor percent of Christians actually hold, but even the right message can have a devastating effect if it's not said in love either.
Yeah, for sure. And you're right. The Westboro Baptist thing, they're kind of a fringe element. Unfortunately, the mainstream media likes to highlight the fringe elements and present them as though they are the typical. And so we're working against that too, is like the false perception that's actually intentionally created in this nation against Christians. And so you have to kind of work against that. But with our age group, people we come in contact with on a day-to-day basis, I think the wind is in the direction of not caring about truth as much. And so sometimes you have to kind of tilt in the other direction to stand in the wind. But I think you're exactly right. You do want to be careful. You have to balance it well and understand that we're trying to win people, not arguments. But we do have to use arguments to win people.
Well, and like we were talking about earlier, with this festival, I think we've learned really well how to stand in the wind.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, if anybody knows, it's the people that were there that day. For sure.
Man, that's terrible. Terrible jokes.
You're saying it's all good.
Oh, man. I definitely appreciate you guys taking some time out. And we were talking right before we started recording here. I had something completely different in mind, but here we are over an hour later, and I love it.
No, that's great, man. Those are the best, right? We just kind of catch the flow. We like the flow, so it's all good. Thanks for taking the time.
Yes, we appreciate you, and it's always encouraging and cool to know that we've met you before when on with you. So we share a fun memory.